Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know what's interesting about Joe Biden? Throughout the 50 years of his career in Washington, he's pretty much admitted everything. You know, I've played so many flashbacks of Joe Biden from 5 years ago all the way to 40 years ago, when he was a young up-and-coming politician, almost like the AOC of the time in a way. But anyways, when you spend that much time in public life, when you spend that much time doing interviews and just speaking in general, a lot of what you say gets recorded and documented, and with Sleepy Joe, it's become a little bit of an issue. These Biden flashback moments are constantly appearing, and every single time they give us deep insight into how much of a piece of work this guy really is. Folks, there should have never been any surprises with Sleepy Creepy Joe because he basically is on the record admitting everything. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean by that. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright friends, so here's a clip that you probably haven't seen before. Here's Joe Biden, I think in the 1980s, although it's possible it's in the 70s. Just take a look at what he had to say.
Senator Biden, it's nice to have you here. As the youngest member of the Senate, the one therefore who may expect the longest career there, I wonder if you'd say to us, since it's clear that you're not corrupt and you got elected, why should people think that the system produces corrupt results when there you are?
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that, though. The system does produce corruption, and I think implicit in the system is corruption, when in fact, whether or not you can run for public office, and it costs a great deal of money to run for the United States Senate, even from a small state like Delaware, you have to go to those people who have money, and they always want something. We were told that we politicians, as the young kids say, rip off the American public. I think the American public, in a way, rips off we politicians by forcing us to run the way they do. To raise $300,000 is no mean feat. And unless you happen to be some sort of anomaly, like myself, being a 29-year-old candidate and can attract some attention beyond your own state, it's very difficult to raise that money from a large group of people. I'm a 29-year-old oddball. The only reason I was able to raise the money is I was able to have a national constituency to run for office. Because I was 29, I'm like the token black or the token woman. I was the token young person. I went to the big guys for the money. I was ready to prostitute myself in the manner in which I talked about it. But what happened was they said, come back when you're 40, son.
Joe Biden essentially admits the quiet part out loud. He started off by saying, I don't know if you should assume that I'm not corrupt, and trust me, Joe, we certainly don't assume that. But then essentially confirms later on that he did in fact attempt to prostitute himself politically to the highest bidder, but they refused to engage with his campaign because he was supposedly too young, telling him to come back when he was 40. He admits it. He admits that he is a typical Washington swamp creature, and he always has been. He said that decades ago, and it's crazy how accurate it's become, huh? I mean, if you really think about it, it feels like political prostitution is kind of the business model of the Biden family as a whole. In another moment during that same interview, he talks about how you have to change your policies and change your speech depending on who you're addressing or depending on who's funding your campaign.
If in fact you know that the only way you can raise any money to get to run for public office is to go to vested interest groups, then in fact you're put in the position that you have to begin to wonder whether or not you prostitute the ideas that you have about government in order to get the money to begin to run.
And again, what it seems like is Joe Biden ahead of time essentially describing his philosophy. You know, I think what he was trying to do during that interview was essentially describe the broken system of American elections and government in an attempt to take the high road and portray himself as non-corrupt and above it all. But of course, fast forward a couple decades later, and it's basically like Joe Biden's political prophecy. Joe Biden is the king of fake promises. Joe Biden is the king of saying whatever he has to say in front of the crowd that he's speaking to. You know, that's where the kooky Uncle Joe stories come from, right? The man's literally invented BS stories. He just writes fiction of himself to paint himself as a hero in front of whatever lobbyist group that he's speaking to, generally unions, right? Well, of course he'll pull out the union shtick whenever necessary. Why? Well, isn't it obvious? They have influence over his campaign. Joe Biden became the exact thing that the interviewer at the time was essentially implying. A lifelong career in Washington. Joe Biden laughed at that idea during that flashback clip, but that's exactly what ended up happening. Going to Washington and making a lifelong career out of it. There's no term limit, so So why blame him when you can enrich your family to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, never having to work a day in your life? All you gotta do is sell your soul to the highest bidder. That's exactly who Joe Biden is. Here's a great example at opensecrets.org. 2020 presidential race. Let's take a look at the top contributors to Joe Biden's presidential campaign. And specifically, let's look at these two right over here. Joe Biden received $5.2 million in campaign donations from FTX.US and $6.2 million from Alameda Research. Those are Sam Bankman-Fried's former corporate entities. Of course, we know how that ended, right? Well, now that Sam Bankman-Fried is facing essentially life in prison for running one of the biggest Ponzi scheme frauds in American history, actually it might be the biggest, all of a sudden we're learning that Biden's DOJ will not pursue the second trial against Sam Bankman-Fried relating to what exactly? Illegal campaign donations. Of course, we know Sam Bankman-Fried was giving money to all kinds of politicians. The popular narrative at the time was that he was giving 50% to Democrats and 50% to Republicans. Turns out that's not exactly the case. We now have data from the Federal Elections Commission showing Sam Bankman-Fried donated $42 million to Democrats and some dark money to Republicans. As you can see here on the chart, the top donations were to the DSCC and the Biden Victory Fund. And so is it any surprise that Biden's DOJ is now not pursuing the second trial related to these illegal campaign donations? Of course it isn't, because again, that's exactly who Joe Biden is. Joe Biden has actually in a way been an open book. You know, sure, he's got a decades-long history of lying. He's one of the biggest liars ever, but he's also a secret truth teller. You know, in a way, he operates corruptly, but he operates corruptly quite openly. Not only admitting back in the 1970s or 80s that he's fully open and willing to sell himself to the highest bidder, but also basically admitting that he strong-armed the Ukrainian government into firing the prosecutor that was investigating his son.
And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a got fired.
It's the typical Biden flashback. This guy is the biggest piece of you-know-what, and it's all on the frickin' record. We have so many flashbacks with this guy. Whether it's him warning of an Afghan withdrawal back in 2006, looking like a complete moron in 2021, after doing the exact thing he warned against, or whether it's Joe Biden during the 1988 election, tanking his campaign, forcing him to pull out from the presidential nomination process, because it turned out he lied about literally every fact relating to his academic career. The guy simply has a well-documented history of being a dishonest, lifelong career politician, willing to say anything to get elected, and willing, of course, like I keep saying, to sell his soul to the highest bidder. Joe Biden doesn't represent you, he represents labor unions. He represents social media oligarchs, Wall Street, the teachers' unions, the list goes on. Just take a look at who's funding his campaign, take a look at his policy, take a look at his actions. It's an extremely clear picture. The idea that Uncle Joe is an honest politician fighting for American interest is a complete farce. Somebody who scammed their way through college by plagiarizing every essay they ever wrote. Somebody who got caught on multiple occasions plagiarizing speeches during their decades-long political career. Well, that simply can't be somebody who we describe as honest. Joe Biden is the embodiment of a Washington swamp creature, and he's essentially admitted it himself. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. You know, we'd love to have you here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.